So I decided to do my final project on tool use behaviors in New Caledonian Crows. I have a fascination with birds, and I'm also very interested in tool use behaviors in non-human animals. So for my study, the goals were to examine the effects of an individual's age on its ability to manufacture and use tools, as well as to examine the possibility for social learning to take place among conspecifics in the three different experimental groups that I'll explain in the next few slides. And then my overall working hypothesis was the ability of captive-raised New Caledonian crows to manufacture and use tools to forage is dependent on their age and past experiences learning from other conspecifics. So for my methodology, I'll go over these 4 points. I'll go over the housing and study site, the study subjects themselves, the reward apparatus and equipment that I designed for this study, and then the data collection processes. So housing. For the study site, it will take place at the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology, located in Germany. There have been lots of previous studies done on tool use behaviors, especially in birds, at this location, so I figured it was a good site to choose. For the birds themselves, there will be 3 separate identical enclosures, one for each of the 3 experimental groups, which I'll explain in the next few slides. They will be modeled after the natural habitat of the crows, which is old-growth forests. So the interior will have several small-scale living trees, several dead snags, and assorted vegetation of different sizes in order to mimic this multi-layered canopy setting of their natural habitat. So for the study subjects themselves, I have created these little drawings, color-coded, of New Caledonian crows to allow you to see the age when I show you the groups in the next few slides. So the pink represents the 1 to 3-year-old birds, and the yellow represents 10 to 12-year-olds. So I decided to go with all captive-raised individuals so that we know the life history of the bird and ensure that they hadn't had any previous tool use experience before the study is conducted. There will be 16 males in total, 8 of them being 1 to 3 years old and 8 of them being 10 to 12 years old. And finally, all the 10 to 12-year-old males have had previous experience with making tools in their captive enclosure settings, and the juveniles have not had any access to materials to construct tools prior to the observation periods. So starting off with group A, you can see that we have 4 1 to 3-year-old birds, and basically this group will test to see if TOBs, or tool-oriented behaviors, are innate. So moving on to group B, you can see that we have 4 1 to 3-year-olds and 4 10 to 12-year-olds. And as I said in the previous slide, the 10 to 12-year-olds have had experience with using and making tools. So this group will function as a test to see if social learning takes place among these conspecifics to pass down the TOBs. And finally, we have Group C, which you can see is 4 10 to 12-year-olds, and these guys have all had experience with tools. They have manufactured tools, used tools, and basically this group will test to see if they continue to use tools in novel situations, or if they even start to adapt or evolve their tools and how they use them. So now we move on to the nitty-gritty of the experiment, the reward apparatus and the tools. So I've created these drawings of the 2 apparatus that I've created. We have reward log version 1 and reward log version 2. So the first one is testing for a hook tool. So basically there are 5 holes drilled into this solid log. 2 of them have meat right at the surface that the birds can reach without a tool, so just with their beaks. And the other 3 are drilled pretty deep in that they can't reach without a tool. And there's a package of meat with a loop on the top in each of these 3 deeper holes. The bird must take the wire that is provided and create a hook to retrieve the package of meat. And then for version 2, it's a hollow log, and the meat is in the center of the log. The bird can't reach it with just their beak. They must use one of the wooden sticks that they are given to push or pull the meat towards them. The groups are all given 2 of version 1 and 2 of version 2, and they are given 8 straight wooden sticks and 8 straight pieces of pliable wire. So obviously the birds need to be able to realize that the straight sticks are long enough to reach into version 2 to pull out, or push out the meat pieces, and the wooden stick is not pliable and will break, so the wire is pliable and can be bent into a hook shape that they can use to retrieve the meat packages from version 1. So now we move on to data collection and equipment. So on the right, I have provided my ethogram of all the TOBs that we will look at in the study. So the data collection will be over a month-long period with approximately 15 trials, so an every other day schedule. The researchers will use all the current sampling of the behaviors listed in the ethogram, as well as have a Canon camcorder set up in these enclosures in a blind in order to collect referential video data. And finally, the researchers will score for the following methods: the success of the birds to get the reward, the frequency of TOBs, the duration of TOB occurrences, and the latency to make a tool. So first discussion question: if you were to conduct a study examining tool use in New Caledonian crows, would you use captive individuals or conduct the study on a wild population, and why? So basically, New Caledonian crows often do their tool use up high in trees, so it's tough to observe them, and they are tough to habituate to researchers. And furthermore, we wouldn't know the life history of the bird necessarily if we did a wild population study, so that is why I decided to do it on a captive individual populations. And for the second question, for my study, I chose to keep sex of the individuals as a constant and use all males. Would you have used all males, all females, or a mix, and why? So basically, I had a lot of moving parts with my study. I was looking at age, I was looking at if it's innate, if social learning took place. There was just too many moving parts to add in another variable of sex, so I kept it constant. Perhaps a future study could look at if there are differences in males and females regarding tool use. So now we have the broader influences. So I have 3 different broader influences here. First, we have social learning. So tool use is often connected to social learning, and we know that it's important in a broad range of aspects of animal lives, such as navigation, courtship and reproduction, communication, and problem solving. So I was thinking that especially in our world today, how our planet's habitats, ecosystems, and overall climate is changing, it's important for us to think about behaviors like tool use, social learning, and maybe even the presence of culture in species that might be of conservation concern, so that we can kind of see if they're unsuccessful or successful at adapting and evolving with the changing environment. And for example, there was a study done with New Caledonian crows that found that they used a tool to probe a novel stimulus, and this brings up the possibility that they were preferring to use a tool in a risky situation rather than risking harm to themselves. So this makes it a fascinating question of whether tool use is evolving from simply a foraging application to a self-protection or investigation situation. And then finally, tool use and social learning connecting to culture. So we know if a specific TOB is passed on to other individuals and grouped through social learning, meaning that it's learned, it's acquired through social transmission, and it persists in the absence of the demonstrator, then that TOB and social learning could lead to the discovery of culture in that species. And of course, we know we have to rule out genetic and environmental factors, but if these aspects aren't at play, then we can study this species to find possibly a form of culture. So now we have our future directions, and I have 3 aspects to have you think about up here. First, if the data shows that they do indeed exhibit social learning in order to pass on TOBs for foraging, future research could look at what other ways they use tools, and it can even be compared to tool use in other corvid species and other bird species in general, and see what kind of connections are made maybe to their evolutionary history. And secondly, another feature study could be looking at wild individuals. Like we've mentioned some of the issues with doing a wild study, but it would make it more ecologically valid, and perhaps they would be able to display their full tool use, which they might not feel comfortable to do in captivity. And looking even broader, looking at captive species, if you find out that a certain species has culture, this can help to improve conditions for captive individuals of that species. Zoos can examine their husbandry practices and create enrichment that can work to eliminate boredom that often plagues captive animals. And it could even allow zookeepers to know which individuals would be kept together or separate to facilitate and encourage display of natural behaviors, and even help the animals form their own version of culture if it has been found in that species. So now we have a final discussion question. What kinds of future studies do you think would have to be conducted to build a stronger case for the existence of culture in New Caledonian crows? So my thought for this was basically that researchers would have to look at different populations of crows and see if their tool use differs from one another, and kind of see if social learning takes place, how that differs, and basically do a comparison of different groups, and make sure that they can rule out the environmental and genetic factors. And finally, here are my references. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Thank you.